Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Yale Council for Latin American and Iberian Studies, CLICE, let me welcome, especially on behalf of her director, Claudia Valeja, and her team. She couldn't be here, and especially to this fourth event of the Latin American Policy Leader Series. My name is Jessica Fayeta. I am a senior fellow at the Jackson Institute of Global Affairs and lecturer on development issues in Latin America and the Caribbean. And today I have the distinct pleasure and honor to welcome our speaker, María-Noel Vaeza, the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean in a very important institution of the United Nations, UN Women. It is a particular pleasure because María-Noel and I are colleagues from the United Nations for the longest time. I have been in the past, before coming to Yale, 30 years in the United Nations, and a big part of this, we have been colleagues and friends, good friends with María-Noel. And both we have worked in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have coincided in many ways. Most recently, when I was Assistant Secretary General and Regional Director in the region. So I can attest firsthand of her knowledge about the region, her expertise, but most importantly, her commitment to, in this case, to the advancement of women. So she is really a fantastic guest for this policy series. The title of her talk is Diversity, Equality, and Gender. And I think you will agree with me that this subject is particularly relevant to reflect on this, not only in Latin America and Caribbean, but I think even in the country that we are right now holding this. And of course, in Yale University, where this subject is also of great interest to the students and faculty. We hope that today's event will provide a forum for discussing the role of organizations such as UN Women for the advancement of diversity and gender. The Latin America and Policy Leaders Series, organized by CLICE, seeks to create dialogue about the future of democratization, human rights, and development with policy leaders from across Latin America and the Caribbean. With this initiative, CLICE hopes to engage leaders from the region in vigorous and respectful discussions about pressing issues while also benefiting from their years of experience. So certainly it's an honor for me to be invited to host and to moderate the talk of María-Noel, as she possesses the right kind of experience that we need to hear right now. So let me tell you a little bit about María-Noel. She assumed her functions as Regional Director for the Americas and the Caribbean in UN Women in 2019, but before that, she worked as the Director of the Program Division at headquarters, and she joined from another UN organization, UNOPS, where she served as the Director for Global Portfolio, and before that, Partnerships Practice and a Strategic Partnership. So she has a long and distinguished career in the United Nations. She also spent 8 years in UNDP, where she held various posts, including Senior Advisor, Deputy Resident Representative in Paraguay, and Senior Manager for the Recovery, Reconciliation, and Reform Program. She also has a distinguished career in public service in her own country, because prior to joining the United Nations, María-Noel held multiple positions in Uruguay's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including as political counselor at the Uruguay Embassy to the United States and as delegate of Uruguay to the United Nations General Assembly. She also was an alternate representative of Uruguay to the World Bank Board of Directors. María-Noel is a national from Uruguay. She holds a doctorate of law and social sciences from University of the Republic of Uruguay. And she also has a master's degree in international and public policy from Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. The structure of today is something you have already are familiar with. She will have her talk. We will then follow with some moderate discussion, which you are invited to raise your hand. And I am particularly welcoming all the people, all the students and faculty who are, and public in general, who are joining us right now online. Before turning the microphone to our speaker, I would like to thank the sponsors of this event. The Latin American Policy Leader Series is generously supported by the George Herbert Walker Jr. Lecture Fund in International Studies at the Macmillan Center for International Studies. And this event would not have been possible without the assistance of the collaborators such as the Office of International Affairs, the Fox International Fellowship Program, and the Program for Peace and Development, and if I may also add, the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, to which I belong. Thank you to the staff and the colleagues who made this visit possible. And without further ado, Maria-Noel, you have the floor.
I feel so old every time I hear my CV. It means that I've been around for some time. Thank you, Jessica. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here, and also being introduced by such a distinguished colleague as Jessica. We've known each other for a long time as well, but Jessica has been a leader in our region, and also we are very happy to see that she's here in Yale. I think that we practitioners, we have something to say and to transmit, but it not always happens that we have this opportunity. So I'm really grateful for Yale and for the faculty, for all the colleagues that has been so kind with me since I arrived yesterday. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. For me, it's very important to bring to your attention what is Young Women, what are we doing, and why it's important to focus on women's issues. And women in all the diversity, because we are not, the same women. That's why the concept of intersectionality is so dear to young women. So I would like to start by saying, what do we do well, I don't know, it doesn't work. But I would like to share with you what is the situation of equality, of gender equality, and of gender inequality as well. But what are the key areas of young women? Where do we work in the region, and how do we see gender inequality in our region, and what are the solutions that we are proposing? Because we try to focus in certain solutions before instead of being everywhere, we try to focus and try to move the needle, as we say, and try to change the reality of women. So we do three things, basically, in our mandate from the General Assembly. We were created 11 years ago. We are really young for the UN. And we were created as a merge of several institutions that were dealing bits and pieces of gender. And it was a very intelligent decision, I must say, from the General Assembly, because we could really merge the specialization that were in the UN everywhere. And we had the opportunity to have our first executive director was Madame Michelle Bachelet, the former president of Chile, and right now she is the High Commissioner of Human Rights. So it was a real honor to have her with us. I was not in Young Women at that time, but I was envious of the Young Women colleagues because they had such a distinguished executive director, and we decided at that time that we should focus our attention on women political participation, women in the public space, on women economic empowerment, the autonomy of women, because we really are half of the population of the world, but we are not contributing to the economy as half the population of the world. And that's why the world is not growing enough, because we are not enough participating. And of course, violence against women, which is the biggest, I would say, shadow pandemic that we have, that came more in light during the pandemic, because it was obvious that this was a big issue that everybody needed to attend. And of course, we are universal, we are global, so women, peace and security is a very important part of our work and the humanitarian response of what we do in that parts of the world. But you know, I didn't know when I came to Latin America, when I came back to Latin America, that the region was going to be in such enormous problems. I thought it was a nice position to be, to really establish innovation, to try to work differently from other UN agencies and, you know, calmly integrate our work and a gender perspective in the work of the other UN agencies. And suddenly we have social unrest everywhere. It was Chile, it was Bolivia, it was Ecuador, it was Colombia, it was everywhere. And it was really a boost of energy coming from the women's movement, because it started on the 8th of March in Santiago de Chile, and then it continued to uprising the indigenous population in Ecuador. But it was women's movement, indigenous women's movement that were behind. And of course, then we have it in Colombia. And Bolivia was in chaos because of the coup d'etat. So it was everywhere. And I said, what is going on in my region? I thought we were overcoming the governance issues. But it wasn't, and it isn't. And it's a big question mark. What is going to happen with our governance? What is going to happen with gender equality? We have only one president who declares himself feminist, which is Boric, the president of Chile, but rapidly he's losing popularity. So he doesn't even have 100 days and he's already been a pariah in many aspects in his country. And we have the constitutional reform in Chile that is also a beacon of hope, how the women's issues are going to be, you know, in the constitution. So here we are trying to attend all this. And suddenly the pandemic came. But we knew that 74% of who was in the front line of the pandemic were women. But only 20% of women were at the forefront of the decision making. So there you start seeing the gap, the discrimination, and the lack of understanding that women have also a say. And they have a say that perhaps is innovative, is different. You can only look at how the leaders, 11% of the leaders of the world are women. And if you see those countries manage the pandemic very well. Like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister of Norway, of Finland. So there is a common thread that women perhaps has a different way of leadership, of making sure that everybody is in the table before taking decision, listening more. And of course, we don't know everything, so we need to consult. So perhaps this kind of leadership with these soft skills that we call them, you know, is what the world needs right now to really confront several crises at the same time, like the pandemic brought into light. So for us, in Latin America, it has been a horrible consequence, the pandemic for women. We were a region that was growing the participation of women in the economy, and the pandemic stopped that, very much so. And now we went back 18 years. We went back 18 years because of one reason, which is care. We women are the main care providers. And suddenly the world realized that care is very important because most of the COVID patients were at home, being cared by whom? By women. So care came to the front line, and care came as saying this is an unpaid care work that we do more than everybody else. So we have weeks of 8 days because our work is to care, and our work without recognition, without redistribution, and without reduction of the unpaid care work. And unfortunately, although we thought this was going to be changed in the pandemic, it didn't. Women continue to do 3 times more care, unpaid care work than men. And in some countries, we did surveys, like in Chile, it increased the unpaid care work of men 7 minutes. 7 minutes. When we have the children at home, when we have to be there for them for the education, when we had to take care of elderly, take care of the children, it means that men are not being co-responsible of the household, of the education of children, of taking care of their own elderly, because normally women take care of their own elderly and the elderly of their partner. So unfortunately, this requires the attention, not just from us as young women, the UN system, but also from civil society, from governments, and particularly from the social media. I think the power of the social media right now give us the opportunity to really change this behavioral and understand that without the core responsibility of men in the household, it's impossible for women to really thrive and participate. And that's why women are not searching actively for jobs in my region, because they have to stay home and provide care. This is why my #1 priority with all my colleagues in the region, we are 550 gender experts in the region in 26 countries. So we are quite a crowd there. And we decided to focus our attention on systems of care, the society of care. We will have the Regional Conference of Women in Argentina on the first week of November. Second week of November. We have this regional conference for the last 45 years. It's in the family of ECLAC. It's an intergovernmental conference. The first one was in La Habana 45 years ago. So it means that this is an institution that we need to preserve. And the subject is society of care, not just the care of people, but the care of biodiversity, the care of climate. So for us, establishing integrated system of care that integrate not just the federal levels, the subnational levels, the municipal level, but private and public, and also community level, because indigenous population, they do care in a different manner that we need to integrate. So that's what we're working. We're working in 12 countries to establish the legal framework, to establish the costing, how much it costs to the government to finance a care system, that it is an investment, because we always say that it has 3 dividends. The first dividend is the care to the family, the welfare of the family, because when you have an elderly, a sick person, a disabled, kids, very small kids, when you have professional support, everybody will be happier, and particularly the woman that is doing the care, unpaid care. The second is for the economy, because there is a creation of jobs that is very important, and is a green economy. They call it the orange economy, because it's not polluting. But you are giving the opportunity to those women that are working in the informal sector, normally as domestic worker. You have to give them the opportunity to study, to do a certification, and to really go out there and be caregivers more professional. So we reckon that this will create millions of jobs, and it will dignify the women that are working in the informal sector, that don't have benefits, that don't have anything except the little salary they receive when they receive it, because in the pandemic we saw that some of them were slaves. They were not allowed to leave the houses because of the contagious. And we believe that those jobs will be paying for taxes. So the system that we are trying to create everywhere will pay by itself. There is an initial investment, but then it will be paid by itself by the creation of jobs in the care economy. And the third dividend is for women to have the opportunity to go out and work and of course, get out of poverty. Because the moment the women have subsidies for care, or the women can provide proper care for their own, she goes to work, and of course she will invest back in their own family. So for us, that's a priority, together with financial inclusion. So we are trying as well to make sure that the different investors, banks, crowd funds, venture capitalists, you name it, fintechs, everybody, have a special consideration of women, because unfortunately we are only 11% of targets. So this is not possible, that 89% of the funds are channeled to men. We need to change that reality, and for that we open up a platform, and what we are trying to do is to bring everybody, and we call it the platform for gender investors. And there are three things that for me are essential there. One is those are investments that are going to yield very positive results. You're going to make money by investing in women. And also you are giving the opportunity to those companies or entrepreneurs that are trying to get out of their micro enterprise lending, that is all well and good, but you never get out of poverty, to scale up their entrepreneur objectives, and really, provide this opportunity to women to thrive. And the third for me, which is essential, is the impact of the social investment, because you are not only investing in women, you are investing in the community where women is inserted. And for that we have 7 principles that we call it the Women Economic Empowerment Principles, that help the private sector and the private banks and the private capitals to understand that this is not just one investment, this is an overarching framework to be successful for an investment. And then, of course, women political participation is still for us very important. We have only 32% of women in parliament, but we have very important examples of parity in all, like it was in the last elections in Mexico. There was a political decision to say, let's have elections parity in everywhere, governors, municipal level, the parliament, and this is working very nicely. It's a lab of parity in the world. And then Bolivia, that declared parity many years ago, and we still have 51% of women in the Senate. So this is also very nice. And also Costa Rica, Argentina, they are countries that they have worked through different laws, how to get to parity or to quotas. But the rest of the region, we're still quite low in women political participation, not just in the parliament, but also as mayors. We have only 15% of women mayors in Latin America. 15% is nothing. Of course, we have Mexico City, we have Bogota, which are enormous cities. But anyway, we need to push women more at the local level. And for us also, it is important to actions at the public sector, which is the gender responsive budget. The national budgets are still the most important development instrument that a country has, but it doesn't have a gender lens. So we really need to work different methodologies to push for gender budgets and gender planning and gender statistics, etc. What you don't count, it doesn't exist. And most of the time, women are completely invisible. And women of color or women of indigenous as descendant on LGBTI, they are completely invisible. So we need to work on those statistics to bring them to the light. Then women economic empowerment, as I was saying, the economy of care and financial inclusion are the things that we have prioritized because we believe they need the most. And of course, violence against women. Violence against women is a horrible problem that we have. If you can think in Mexico, there are 12 women that are dying a day just for the sake of being a woman. So we really need to and we have more or less 4,000 feminicides a year in the region. So those are daring data that we need to change the reality. And how do we change that? By changing legal frameworks, by making sure that we have the data, because it's very, it's very scattered, the data. So we really need to, and to have, centers of care, centers that can care women when they are first being victims of violence, right? So this is what we normally do. We work with a framework, we work with data, we work with integrated different interagencies response that government has, etc. And then, of course, for us, it's essential to understand the financial of those gender programs. And we are pushing for STEMs, women in STEMs. We don't have enough girls or adolescents studying the careers of the future or the career of the present. So we need women in technology. That's why we have several initiatives to introduce women to technology, to science, etc. We're still only 30% of women that are studying or working in the STEMs area in the region. So, and the last point for me will be democracy, governance, social unrest, and all the things that we have been watching all around in the media, but also the lack of opportunity for women to be in the decision-making tables and to bring their own perspective, which is different from men, but also the solutions. Because women have very important solutions. As mothers, as community leaders, they can see things in a different perspective, and they can help governments and civil society and private sector to bring different perspective and a different human development, if I may say. So I would like to stop there, and thank you very much for listening, and I'm here for answering any questions and receiving recommendations as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria-Noel. Can I invite you to sit here so we can now have a conversation?
Ooh, this is comfortable.
Thank you very much. You have given us really a very sobering, I think, situation on what is happening in Latin America and the Caribbean with regard to diversity, to the situation of women. But I also found it very encouraging that you are working and focusing on very specific solutions, especially when you talk about the integral systems of care, and also empowering of women with very clear solutions going forward. Let me open for some questions before I have some questions of my own, but I'd like to give the opportunity to the students and also to the public who is connected to give us some questions. So anybody that has some questions, please raise your hand. Well, while they get, here we have, please introduce yourself, from what school you are, what year, and go ahead with your question.
My name is Daryl. I'm a first-year master's student at the Jackson Institute. I was wondering, were there any thoughts about paying just women just for being at home in general? So you mentioned having care workers come in and allow women to go out and work, but paying women for the work that they already do, was that like any policy discussions around that? Or?
Yes, thank you for your question. And yes, indeed, in my country, Uruguay, it exists a sort of a payment for stay-at-home mothers, and it's a subsidy. I wouldn't like to call it subsidy, because if you analyze the time that women spend in care, it could get to 20% of the GDP. We did that study in Mexico, in Colombia, and it's much more than oil, than minerals, that everything. So it means that the development of the country is in the shoulders of women. So this is a payment that the government of Uruguay, Colombia, Panama, Argentina, they decided to do to women to stay home and care. And it's working very nicely, because some of the women are saying, I'd rather stay home than be out there. And what we notice is that we did a study some years ago about the pyramid of women. The women that are in the basis of the pyramid, women that were mothers because they were raped at 15 or 16 years. They are very poor. They haven't finished their education. Those women, if they want to go out for work, they have to indebt themselves to get a care provider. So we have internal debt of the most poor of the women, because there isn't a system of care that can allow them to go to work and to get out of poverty or go back to study, etc. So for us, this has been something that we really brought into the attention. There are some women that want to stay home. They need to have that payment, but there are some women that they want more from life. They want to continue studying. So we really, when we provide the, I would say the technical assistance, we put all this. So we were discussing with the Minister of Social Affairs of Chile on this respect to map how many women are, how much this is going to cost. So we created different methodology of costing of the different care, you know, care provider, the person that wants to stay home, how much the payment. But we should pay attention to the time that women uses on a daily basis for care. And that has a value, and it's more valuable than any industry in the country. But yes, this is part of our toolkit of advice to governments.
Please.
Hi, my name is Brianna. I'm a graduating student at the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. I'm also Mexican, and I worked last summer with ICLAC, helping them plan their regional conference for women. My question for you is how to foster political will in the political climate that is going on right now in Latin America to incentivize these governments that right now have so many needs to cover to make that initial investment in women. How to convince presidents, how to convince the ministries of finance to listen to the ministries of the women and invest the money in care systems.
Thank you for your question. Muchas gracias. Well, we are trying to convince them. And last Sunday, the president of Argentina, and Argentina is in a big trouble economically, he announced that he was sending the law for creating the care system. And he put it as an investment. We did the talking points. I hope it doesn't get out of here. But it was a convincing, not just from the Ministry of Gender, but also from different arguments, economic arguments. The meeting we have with the Minister of Economy was pure economic value of the investing in the care system. And I remember his face. He looked at us and said, "Okay, I accept that." So when you bring numbers, when you compare industries, we did a study in Turkey together with UNDP and the University of Ankara to compare the infrastructure sector and the care system that we wanted the Minister of Finance to invest. And he was convinced with the sheer numbers. And I guess that we people who work in development and with gender issues, normally we are seen as, you know, the crazy feminists that go and march, and we're not that. We are that plus. And I guess that but continue the studies and deepening the study. That's why I'm so happy to be here, because it's so important that academia takes the focus out of the the agenda that is a traditional agenda of gender, which we need to continue because human rights is super important for us and we have to put it at the center. But we also have to analyze, you know, these things that I'm saying about getting the autonomy of women, economic empowerment, because I am convinced that the more autonomy a woman is, the less likely she will be a victim of violence. So I think that things are related. And also she will have the leadership skills as well to become a politician. So, I mean, I tend to be romantic and believe in all that.
It's good to be romantic, especially because we need people who are convinced of this. And I think I cannot think of better colleagues than you and women to pass this passion. I want to ask you a question of my own while, you know, students think of other questions. You mentioned about the importance of investing in women's projects. We have some students from business school, right? And of course, at the end of the day, nobody's going to invest just because they are women's project. They need to be, as you said, good business.
Yes, yes.
So tell us a little bit more about this fund that you're proposing as especially to the venture capitalists, to the new.
So I'm not proposing a fund. I'm proposing a platform of knowledge, because I remember the first time we invited JP Morgan and Citibank, and there was a lot of American banks, but also European banks, and we did it with the University of de la Empresa de España, Spain, with Susana Malcora, that used to be the chief of staff of Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General, and she was also Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina. Susana called me and said, how can we work together in this? So we decided to create this platform together with the European Union, the European Bank of Reconstruction. But we were talking about investments that yield very positive results, but are products for women, women's led organizations or entrepreneurs, and also services for women. And I give you an example. And there I found, by researching who is who in the financial world and why is it that they are not investing in women. And I came across with the first unicorn of the region. And she was called herself the pink unicorn. She's little like this. She's from Argentina and she lives in Miami. So I went to see her and said, how did you manage to get $1 billion for women's investment? And she said, it was very difficult. I had to navigate a lot of sexual harassment. I had to navigate a lot of sesgos, ¿cómo se dicen? Bias from men that they just wanted to have dinner or lunch with me just for the sake of it. And it took only one man that was a big investor that realized, I hear you, I will invest in you. And when he decided, then it came across many others. And one of the investments that was the first investment that she came across was an American biotechnology that she invented, and most women are going to sympathize with me, a machine to do the mammography, but with a gender lens. It's a machine that captures your breast, and you don't have to be squeezed as it is, which is horrible the way it is done, because of course it was done by a man, because no women can really invent a machine like that. So she decided to create this machine, and also it's mobile. So it means that you can go to rural areas, and etc. So, you know, she came with this investment of $20 million, and this man realized that this is a money-making machine. So he invested $100 million. So the American lady said, oh my God, what am I going to do now with this kind of money? So now she is producing the machines, and most likely you will benefit from that. But this is an example of a product and a service that is done with a gender lens. And it took one man to realize that we really need to shift that. So that's what we're trying to do, to educate the financial sector, to understand that there are biases. And we need a test with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank Research Department. We send 20 actors and actresses, 10 men and 10 women, in Santiago de Chile to get a loan from a bank. The same conditions, everything. They were young, they were 28, and 20% of women were rejected the loans just because they were women. And then we realized that the risk analysts were 99% men. And the bias was, oh, you are at the age of conception, most likely you will be a mother, so you will not pay me the loan. Why? I mean, 99% of the return of debt, women are 99% responsible, much more than men that are 80%. So this bias, we needed to explain, we needed to educate. And of course, when we went we had a meeting with the presidents of the banks, they were all men, you know, and when I presented, I said, you lost $6 billion of business because of the bias. What? They said. There you go. When you have bias, when you don't understand the product and service that women wants to do, and the fact that women are most likely more inclined to work as a network, the sorority of women, the association, cooperatives, you know, you name it. We could be a force of nature, the energy that women of the region has. We can be out of poverty very soon. So this is what we are fighting, you know, the patriarchalism, this bias, these ways of not understanding the diversity, how the diversity can help for the business environment. So this is what we are trying to do with this platform.
Great story, Maria-Noel, great story. Any more questions from the audience? Please, we have.
My name is Mariana. I'm from the School of the Environment. I'm graduating this year as well. And I was wondering if within UN Women there have been talks about how to create cultural change, maybe at the local level, in schools, because I think one of the biggest barriers for women's empowerment and women equality in the region is even when women have the opportunity, they weren't raised to feel like they were capable of taking those roles, and the men around them are not encouraging them to take those roles. So how do we address that in a way that's respectful to, of course, to the region and to the current norms, but building towards a more equal society for all?
Thank you for the question. We are doing it by three things. We work a lot with UNESCO and with UNICEF as well, other UN agencies that are more in education than us. We have a program that is called Second Chance Education in Mexico and in Chile. Those are pilot projects financed by a private foundation. And what we are doing there is to reach out to those women that left the education system because of what you're saying, because they were early mothers, early pregnancies, and because they were pushed by their partners to stay home, and because they didn't have the self-confidence. So this program is about self-confidence. It's about rebuilding the willpower of women. And most likely those women are victims of psychological violence, right? So we have 2,000 women in Mexico, not in Mexico City, in 2 states. And what I saw was incredible, because I met them the first day that we started the program. Nobody dared to talk. They were crying all the time. You know, they were you know, they're nervous and with fear, what is going to happen if my husband sees that I'm here? And then 2 years later, I came to visit the program. I couldn't believe what I saw, you know, those women with self-confidence. I am an entrepreneur. I handle the money now. If he doesn't like it, he can leave, you know. And they say, oh my God, what happened here? So by building their self-esteem, and it's not traditional education, if you want, but it's the education they need. And in the pandemic, most of them lost their entrepreneurial initiatives, but they rebuilt others. And the most important thing that I saw was a network between indigenous women, between women that were discriminated because of their age, because they were too young or too old, you know. So we have to tackle the self-confidence, because that's why it's been too many centuries of telling you can't do it because you're a woman, you can't do it because you're a woman. So there is built in your genes. You can't do it because you're a woman, you know. So we have to remake it, and we have to understand that self-confidence will take you very far away and will allow you to be brilliant in whatever you do. And I think we are still in the era of first time an astronaut woman that goes to the moon, first time a woman becomes a unicorn, first time a woman is president. So we are still in that era, you know. So what we need is accelerators. We need the accelerator by changing the behavior. And to answer your question, we are using behavioral science, we are using positive deviance, we are trying to bring all the menu of of things that are happening in innovation, not just, but I think behavioral science, neuroscience, it's important to use it to change community. And also, and that's my last point, we are working with religious leaders. Because religion is part of our life, and you know, I realized by working with religious leaders of all different religions, they didn't even know they were doing the discrimination, or they didn't even realize how much harm they were doing to women. So it was so interesting to work with Catholic priests, pastors from different denominations, Muslims. We have an enormous network that we work on a regular basis. And, you know, they thought that feminism was about abortion or was about, you know, shouting in the streets. So they didn't realize all these things. And they say, you're right. We need to respect the dignity of women. That is every religion, the dignity of women. So that's where we're, and that's why for us, human rights of women are essential and central to our work.
I would say, Maria-Noel, this is so important what you just said, and of course we're counting on Yale students,
yes,
male and female, who are going to become world leaders, who are going to get jobs to also think about this in advance, because it also, this self-esteem for women, it also is part of looking at role models like many of you will be, exactly. And pull other women, and you know, you're going to be working in your countries. Many of you are from our region, so we are counting on them.
Yes.
So I think we have one more question from Juan.
The gentleman.
Juan.
Thank you so much. I'm Juan, first year master's student at the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs from Colombia, and well, there are many questions, some of which we have started to answer, but I guess my main one is, how does the challenges of working to empower women between rural and urban areas changes? Because it's still kind of an urban movement, and the rural ones are even in a worse condition. So what are the difference in the challenges, and how are you creating different strategies to make sure that also rural women are empowered properly?
Thank you for your question. And yes, it's different, the objectives in life, but it's also different the context. And the context for equality and diversity is very important as well. I would say that in Colombia in particular, after the peace agreements, we have 100 provisions of gender equality in the peace agreement. So we are working with women that were most affected by the conflict. So for us, it has been an amazing opportunity to realize the leadership that is emerging in rural areas, indigenous women, Afro-descendant women. And their voice will never be shut down. I can tell you, once they started, they are amazing leaders. And we have the opportunity, perhaps, we don't know yet, but there is a very prominent Afro-descendant leader that is candidate to be vice president. And this is the first time that is happening in the country. So I hope that, you know, the rural women have the same needs as the urban women, but they've been treated differently. In the self-esteem, they need the same things. In the political participation as well, and the economic empowerment as well. And they suffer violence the same. I think it's the intensity and it's the lack of networks. And so that's why we need to push for more networks. And we need to be more aware from the UN in particular to these amazing women that are emerging as leaders and bring them to the table. Normally we tend to work with the urban leaders because they are the most noisy, but we need to be caring for the ones that are left behind. And I see in the region is emerging a lot of indigenous women, Afro-descendant women. We had an amazing leader in the vice president of Costa Rica. She's Afro-descendant, and in Costa Rica, you never think that there is an Afro-descendant population that is a minority, but is extremely important. And I think that the more we have to integrate them and you know, provide them with opportunities of more training or more exposure. We went to the Security Council with the mothers of Sepul Sarco. It was a location in Guatemala where the women were systematically raped as an instrument of war. So we demonstrated this is the only case in the world that by weaponizing the sexual slavery, the national law condemned the militaries. It's the first. So we went to the security, and it was only indigenous women who were telling their story in their own language because they didn't speak Spanish. So, you know, we're trying to make role models, to bring them to the tables and to conversations. You know that with the pandemic we were all the time in Zoom, you know, but they didn't have technology, so they didn't have access. 40% of the women in Latin America, they don't have computers. They don't have access to internet. 40%, and we are talking about, you know, 40% of 300 million. So, you know, by trying to listen into them, because they are solution makers for climate change's adaptation, climate change's mitigation, to preserve the biodiversity. So it is so important to listen to them and integrate their demands in the... And also the feminist movement is very particular because they don't like young. They don't like the young because they say they don't know, they don't have experience. Hello, what are you talking about? So we had a lot of problems with the traditional feminists. They didn't want it, the younger generation. They don't have an NGO, they are movements. They will disappear, no. So I have an advisory board as a regional director, and they are so diverse. This is the first time they are very diverse because I brought young from every intersectionality. And the traditional feminists say, how come I'm not in your board? And I say, you will never be. Because you don't bring the diversity, and I need to listen to what are they. And also I brought one man, so everybody was indignated. How can you bring a man? Because they are the solution to our problems as well. So I think that we need to listen to each other much more. We need to work much more with men, and we need to bring leaders that are respectful of the dignity of women, no matter where we come from. The intersectionality is critical, and human rights are still, you know, the values that we need to defend. Otherwise, I am not very optimistic of what is happening in the region from political side, but I am very optimistic with the youth of the region and of course the women of the region.
Thank you very much, Maria-Noel, for this wonderful talk of so many important issues that you have brought, and especially for showing here at Yale how broad and how new the gender and diversity agenda is, and so many topics that are still on the table that need to evolve. I would like, we have literally 2 minutes before we cut, so I would like to ask you a final question is your recommendation that you would like to leave the Yale students.
Yes.
So many, as you can tell, they are interested, and I have seen them in my classes, how engaged, how interested they are. How can they contribute to advance gender and diversity, not only in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, but in their own ambit, where they're going to be moving and working going forward?
Well, first of all, you are the leaders of the future, as Jessica was saying, and I think that you will be much broader leaders if you understand the gender dimension in all the aspects as we were discussing. I believe that Yale, as a fantastic institution it is, if you do more research on these matters, if you put your focus on researching these alternative issues of gender, because normally academic focus on human rights, on public policies that needs to be done, but I would say that sometimes the research does not match what is happening in the region. So it would be great if we can have you students to come more to the region and to bring the amazing academic structures that you are receiving here to Latin America, because we still have very poor universities, poor in the sense that we are not modernized. I see when I talk with students that they think in a unilateral way. They are not crossing different frontiers, and I think that we need to do much more cross-fertilization work. Yesterday I have the privilege to have dinner with fellow students from Turkey, from Israel, from Mongolia, from Germany, and they are doing amazing work. I was so excited to listen to them. Thank you very much for you to... she's doing a research on an amazing issue. Why is it that women in Turkey are voting conservative when the conservative government is pushing women to be much more conservative? So there are so many issues that you guys can have the luxury to research, being in such a prestigious institution. So I really would like to see much more research being done on these issues, cross-fertilized on different regions of the world, because we are called the middle income region, but we are the most unequal region in the world, and we are still with low productivity, with so much inequality. How can we get out of this trap that we are as a region? So economic factor, financial factors, climate changes, so all these factors is not just gender issues, it's like how the perspective of women can be studied there. And for me also, it would be an honor if we can have some of you come into UN Women. We have offices in many countries. Our regional office is in Panama, but we have offices, our biggest office is in Colombia, and then we have in Haiti, in the Caribbean, in Mexico, Argentina, you name it, Brazil. So you're much welcome to come to our offices to do your research in situ, and that would be great. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and I hope that I put some seed of, of trying to continue working in gender issues, but in different dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Maria-Noel.